So, welcome to Little Leaps. We are truly honored to welcome our global audience today from every corner of the world. And thank you for joining us in this meaningful conversation about guiding the child's inner formation. It's my great privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Mary Ellen Maunz. With over 50 years of dedicated service to Montessori education, Mary Ellen brings a legacy of deep wisdom, leadership, and love for the child. Her journey spans 38 years in Montessori teacher training, 18 years in the classroom, and 30 years as a school administrator. And as the founder of and program director of the Age of Montessori, now Authentic Institute of Montessori, she continues to inspire educators and parents around the globe. So, Mary Ellen is also a published author, having written Learning to Read a Child's Play and Nurturing Your Child's Inner Life. She is a sought after international speaker and consultant, having presented across North and South America, Africa, Asia, and Russia on topics dear to children and families. She has served on prestigious boards including the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education and continues her work as MACTE Site Evaluator. Beyond her professional achievements, she is the proud mother of 3 grown children, and today's conversation will help us deepen our understanding of the child's inner world, the role of the adult, and how are we able to better nurture the child's natural drive to learn, grow, and become the best version of themselves. So let's give a warm welcome to Mary Ellen Maunz, a visionary guide in the world of Montessori education. Welcome, Mary Ellen, and I would like you to start with your journey into Montessori world and what inspired you to dedicate your life to this work.
Well, thank you for your lovely introduction. And it's nice to meet all of you, at least see most of your pictures. And my journey starts back in 1970, way before any of you were born. And I met a woman who I very highly respected, and we were talking about what I could do with my life because I had gained admission to the University of California, Santa Barbara, my hometown, as political science major. But I just couldn't see where it was going. And I did not want to waste my mother's money on something that wasn't really going to work for me. So I dropped out of school and I was talking with this woman and she just looked at me and she said, well, why don't you think about becoming a Montessori teacher? And I said, what's a Montessori teacher? I was not even familiar with the name Montessori at that time. And so, but I was living up in British Columbia, Canada at the time, and I went into a bookstore up there called Monroe's Bookstore. It's still there, and in Victoria, and I found the book, The Absorbent Mind. And when I started reading it, I was literally jumping for joy. It spoke to me about the inner teacher, about the child, the respect that we can give to the children and the freedom that we can give them. And I was so excited. I immediately called my mother and said, will you pay for me to get Montessori training? And she said, yes, if you have to, find a place to live. And I had to go down to Los Angeles. And I took my AMI training in 1971 from the AMI Institute in Los Angeles. And I started teaching after that. And then a couple of years later, I went to Bergamo and took my AMI elementary training and have really been, as Midori was saying, I've been in Montessori as a teacher, as an administrator, and as a teacher trainer for all the rest of my life. That's what I've done with my life. And I think the understanding, I was one of those kids that I read all the time from the time I was 6 years old when I learned to read, but I did not like school. I was bored by school. And so becoming a teacher was the last thing I wanted to do. But when I read about Montessori, it was like, oh, this is something different. This is not this is not the same thing. And so it allowed me to actually go for it and get my training and get into the classroom. And so I think, it's been a very long journey. It's been more than 50 years, and I am so grateful every day when I wake up. And I keep Montessori books in my room, in my office, and in my living room because I'm always picking them up to read a little bit more and go a little bit deeper. And she was the most remarkable person, and she's really completely changed my life. I can say that. This woman who introduced me to Montessori and Montessori herself.
Absolutely, that's so true. And every time we read Maria Montessori's book, I always get enamored. And every time we read the same book, also again, it feels like something new is discovered. Every time something new we learn from the same topic, the same phrases, the same paragraphs. But every time we read, we learn something new. So for those who are
so much, it's because we bring something new to it because of our experience with the children. Oh, now I know what she's really talking about.
That's very true. Yeah. So for those unfamiliar with her work and herself, would you like to give a brief overview of Maria Montessori?
Sure. She was born in about 1872, I think, or 1870 in Italy, and she wanted to become an engineer. She wanted to be involved in a boy's profession, which was unheard of in her day. So she went to a technical school for a few years, and then she jumped kind of from the frying pan into the fire, where she decided she wanted to become a physician. Well, she became the first woman physician and surgeon in Italy. There's some dispute of if she was the first or among the first, but we'll just say she was the first. And she had to battle a lot of concerns that women didn't belong in the medical field, and they could not examine male bodies, for example. And when she would have to go and be part of learning how to do an autopsy, she'd have to go at night by herself because she was not allowed to be there with the men, and just little weird things like that that made her life so much more difficult. And her father didn't approve of what she was doing either in the first years, but later he came around. But anyway, she then there's this wonderful story. If you've read Montessori, you're familiar with it. But she one night at this autopsy room just said, enough, I'm leaving, I'm not doing this anymore. And she was walking across a park at night, and she saw a little gypsy woman with her little toddler playing with a piece of colored paper on the grass. And when she saw that child and the focus of that child, something awakened in her, and she said later she could not explain what happened exactly, but she decided she had to go back and she had to stick it out. Little did she know that she'd ever be teaching teachers for that age. But anyway, she continued and got her diploma. She worked at several universities. She was a teacher of education, of medical practices and so forth. She also had her own private practice, and she started working with children who were disadvantaged, who had what in those days they might have called them retarded. We might call them something different now, but they definitely had learning difficulties. And she went into this room where these children were kept with a bunch of adults that were in an insane asylum. And so the children were kept in the same facilities as these adults, and there was absolutely nothing on the shelves. Nothing. There were no shelves. There was nothing for them to play with or work with. And Montessori tells one time the children were finishing lunch, and the children were on the floor picking up the crumbs. And the nurse who was showing her around said, "Just look at those little animals. They're just picking up the crumbs off the floor." And Montessori saw, I believe she saw with the eyes of the heart. And she understood that they were looking for something with their hands. They needed something to work with. So she managed to create, because she was a well-known physician at that time, managed to create a program where she would bring some of these children in a school and into a place where she could give them materials with their hands. And of course, they immediately started to improve their skills and their abilities. And that was her work for a number of years. at an institution called the Orthophrenic Institute. And from there, in 1907, she was given the opportunity to try out her system with materials with a group of normal children. They were the children of very poor people who had been given a housing development, and the parents went to work every day. The older children were in school, and the younger children were just running riot around this place. And they were given her then the opportunity to create something for these young children. Well, she got some little tables. In those days, materials for children were not really easily available, but she managed to pull together some things, and she started experimenting with these children. And one of her predecessors, a man named Edouard Séguin, had created some materials, such as some of you might know, the cylinder block. And there were a few things that he had created, and she used those with the children, and then she created many more things and had them made. And before long, these children were amazing. They had calmed down, they were centered, they were focused, and they started learning. And it was really quite an experience for her. And pretty soon people started to come to visit. And she tells the story. I mean, a queen came, clergymen came from the churches. People who from various governments came that were visiting Rome for one thing or the other. They all came and saw, and it was considered to be the discovery of the soul, if you can believe it or not. That's what people were writing about, because she had been able to reveal some part of these children that was calm, that was centered, that was able to work despite their socioeconomic problems, despite all things around them. And this was the beginning, really, of the Montessori method. And over the years after I took my training in 1979, I got a letter from a woman, and her name was Dr. Elizabeth Kaspari. Some of you might have heard that name. She lived in India for many years in Kodaikanal with Montessori. And but in any case, she wrote me, and we started communicating, and she came and we started a training center together. But in her words, Montessori is not a method, it's a message. And I love that concept. It's a message. It's a message of the respect for the child. It's a message of how we can support the child, not tell him what to do, but support him in however ways, with the beautiful materials she designed and many other ways that we'll be talking about. One of the questions people ask me, well, this was, way more than 100 years ago. How can that be relevant for our children now? And I think the reality is that the children are the same, no matter where you go in the world. And I've had the opportunity, I've not been to India, but I've been in every continent, and I've trained in every continent. And I see that the children are the same. They get their teeth changed at the same time. They learn to speak at the same time. They learn to walk at the same time. They all like the same activities, more or less. They did their work in the 1930s, and they recently, the Gesell Institute, and recently the Gesell Institute has rechecked children, and they found that no matter how many years pass, the same trajectory of development has not changed. The cultures around the children have changed, but that basic stages of development, as Montessori described them, that doesn't change. And that was very much a relief. It's based on human nature. It's based on the way children develop, and they're still developing in much the same way.
Absolutely. So I have a 5-month-old nephew here, and yes, and now that I'm seeing his milestones and the stages of development, as you said,
yes,
we rarely get chance to work with infants, families, and infants. So everything that I have studied so far, it's coming back to me, because I can see, oh yes, involuntary movement. Oh yes, the cooing. All that is coming. It's like, oh yes, there is no difference. It's the same, as you said. It is relevant because the essence of human soul is going to be the same with whatever ages may pass, generations may pass.
yeah.
So very few people know that Maria Montessori was also nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Yes.
And as you mentioned, people came to know that what she revealed was the child's soul, the human soul, in its true essence, right? Um, what other work you think has made it so impactful that is beyond education that made her being nominee for Nobel Peace Prize for 3 times?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think that there is many Montessori teachers that I know how to do the lessons. And they know a little bit about the philosophy, but they have not really dug deeply. And over 50 years, that's what I make it my business to keep digging and digging and digging. And some of you may have done the same thing. And there's one, it was published in a booklet from a lecture that she gave, I don't know when, but she basically says that when you get a child who obeys what you tell him. He does what you do and what you say, how much and when and how, and all the different qualifications that we put on children, telling them exactly what to do. She said, this is creating the adult who's willing to submit to tyranny. Okay. This is profound stuff. And she said, when we, on the other hand, give them a classroom and an environment, whether it be something we create at home with a little shelf in their bedroom or whatever, and give them the freedom to choose and to do the work that calls to them and allow them to do it as long as they want over and over and over again. That is freedom. And we're setting the stage for a free society. And so I think she was one of the first thinkers to see the connection between how we raise our children and the kind of adults that we have and the kind of civilizations that we have. And I think that, in my mind, that's the most essential thing. And I think I happen to attend via Zoom a meeting of people at the White House. This was maybe 10 years ago. It was when Obama was still president in the United States. And it was all these business leaders talking about early childhood education. And not a single one of them understood that there was any value in teaching a child under first grade. They just, we live, and I don't know what it's like in India, but in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance about the development of children, what they need, when they need it. And I think that all of these things are part of why she is so relevant today and why those nominations were so important to let people realize, wow, this is something that we need to look at.
Absolutely. Yes, it's no different in India as well. And I think uh, education below grade one is more of looking at the commercial aspect and engaging children rather than understanding their developmental needs. And it is
Mhm.
very unfortunate because when there is time for children to develop and reach their full potential is when they are they are given toys and toys which are non-productive.
Mhm.
So it's a very sad, and this is where I was coming at. So you have written a book on the child's inner teacher. Maria Montessori mentioned about the inner teacher in every child. So would you like to explain what it means and how can parents and educators support inner teacher in every child?
Well, I think that the answer to that question has to do with bigger things in Montessori. We have what we call the prepared environment, and we create an environment, whether it be at home or in a classroom, where children are free to select their activities. And a lot of people say, well, you can't let children choose. They're going to be making chaos and making a mess. Well, not really. Not if you go into a Montessori classroom, you see for yourself. No, that's not what happens. There's some days that there's chaos, but it's not very difficult to get them centered into wanting to work when there's materials that they're shown how to use at the time when they're ready for it. And I think, for each one of us, we know the difference between right and wrong. We know when we're ready to act, if that's something that we was really not the nicest thing to say or do, or if that's really something from our higher self. And so I think when we created an environment for children and allow them to choose, we're encouraging them to connect with their own desires, their own sense of, I need to do this. This is what I want to do. They couldn't tell you why they need to do this now, but they simply show us by their action that that's doing something is satisfying to them at some inner level. I'll tell you a story. The little girl of my dear friend of mine was about 3.5, and her mother was, every morning would fix her hair, and those are the days when you were losing a lot of bobby pins to fix your hair up and whatever. And so this little girl, her name was Tatiana, she went in and she was watching her mommy do this. And then all of a sudden she picked up the bowl of bobby pins and threw it out on the floor. And the mother said her first response was, I better slap her hand or tell her to pick that up. But instead, I had been talking to her just the day before about sensitive periods in development. And she said, well, I'm just going to watch. And so she watched the little girl pick up each one of the bobby pins and put them back in the bowl, dumped them out again and picked them up. She did that 4 times. And what was amazing is that every day for the next 2 weeks, she did the same routine. There was something inside of her that needed that pincher grip. Her brain was telling her it's time to refine that pincher grip. But this happened to be something in the environment that allowed her to utilize what her inner impulse was trying to have her develop. And I thought that's such a great story because it indicates, okay, when the child is finding something that appeals to them and answers some internal need of them, I call it the great match. If the external environment matches the internal need, then you get peace. You get a child who's in touch with his inner teacher. He chooses what's necessary for him at that time, and he might work at it for a long, long time. I've had children who've done dishwashing, for example, for 50 minutes. And then I was actually visiting a school where a little girl was doing that. And then I was observing her, the teacher, as one of my interns. And so I was flying home, and in the airport, there was a Time magazine, which is, of course, one of the world's premier magazines. And it was saying that, well, the greatest thing we know about children now is that they can concentrate for up to 10 minutes. And I just thought how ill-informed they are because they don't understand the child. They don't understand what Montessori found in the child and that ability to concentrate. And that, to me, that desire to find something that satisfies you, that you concentrate. And, there are authors about adults, for example, a man named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi from the University of Chicago, maybe 20 years ago. He wrote a book called Flow, and he talked about that point where you get so into what you're doing, you don't even think about it. It's lunchtime, you don't even think about anything else. You're just lost in it. And I think that's what our children do. They create a little bubble around themselves of this intense concentration. And there might be 25 other children in the classroom, and they're so locked into their work because it's satisfying something inside of them. And, Montessori says, we don't need to know what's being satisfied in them. We don't need to know. She said, all we need to know is that we see this, and this is satisfying the child. So leave it be. In one of her books, she talks about the center and the periphery. And she said, we create these beautiful materials around the periphery. What's going on in the center of the heart and mind of the child is not our business. We just see that it's happening.
This reminds me of my experience with my daughter when she was 2.5 or 3. So I was creating an art corner for her, and I painted a wall, one corner of a wall with various shapes, and painted it beautifully. And she was so inspired that she got her colors and spread it on the floor, and then dabbed her palm, and then patted it all over the wall. And then she very happily, she comes and she calls me and she shows it saying, see, Mama, what you did, I am doing it there. And of course, it was a mess. So my expression for a moment was definitely not approving, So she got a little scared and she's like, it's okay. You don't worry. I'm going to clean it. And I saw, being a young child, she exactly knew what to do. She went, she got a napkin, washed it, wet it, got it, and she started wiping the wall. She started wiping it, but the colors were not coming out, and she was so panicked and scared that made my heart melt. And I said, I am not going to react to it. And I said, it's fine. And in fact, I kept it for a long time, I think for around 5, 6 years, so that when she grew, she always saw it and she felt so happy that my art corner was accepted. So yeah,
That's
I can see that children actually, when we give them this kind of environment, they want to, explore and reveal themselves. But having said this, I also want to ask you a question. Now, children at a very young age like to explore things by also imitating. For example, mopping the floor or sweeping or dusting.
right.
When they are exploring the environment through imitation, we also need to have those boundaries. For example, in case of my daughter, where she just went and painted the wall, and I had to draw a line saying, "This is it, and you're not going to go and paint the entire house." Right? So, and yet the child wants to try. Now, what do we do, and how do we support the child to, still follow their inner teacher, but also maintaining those boundaries so that it's not chaotic.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you're just sharing a story about your child. I'll tell you a story about my youngest daughter. One morning I woke up and she was at the Kleenex box and she was pulling them out one by one by one. And my first response is, oh God, what am I to do with all those Kleenexes? And then but she was picking each one up and holding it in front of the light. And she was just in bliss. And I just thought, well, wait, this is not going to hurt anything. I can stuff the Kleenexes back in the box when she's done. But I realized that she was engaged in something that really was meaningful. So sometimes, I guess what I'm saying is sometimes we have to be a little flexible with our boundaries. Maybe something, if it's not destructive, it's not hurting anybody or anything, maybe it's going to be okay after all. But then there are things that um, they can't do. And what Montessori would say is to teach by teaching, not by correcting. So if you see them trying to do something that's not right, try to get that energy and just, oh, come join me. I would like to show you how to do this, and see if you can get them interested in doing, like, coloring on papers instead of the wall, or whatever it might be. So I think that's important, to teach by teaching, not by correcting, because she talks a lot about, if you correct a child in front of the other children in the class, he may be humiliated and shut down for days. He won't receive any lessons from you, or doesn't want to listen to you. But, if you simply go to him quietly and say, oh, let's do this. The other thing that Madame Kaspar used to say is, this is the way we do it here. It's very matter of fact. We don't color on the walls. This is just the way we do it here. And children pretty much will follow that. You're creating boundaries, but the thing is that boundaries can't change every day. And like, as a mom, I know that some days you're feeling great, you let him do something, and then the next day you've got a headache, you don't want him to do it. And so how's he supposed to know? So we have to sit down with our spouses or our significant others and talk about what's allowed and what's not allowed in our family. What words can you say and what words can you not say? What is whining acceptable, but hitting back is not? Just define those points and then be consistent.
So
I
lately,
guess.
what I'm observing is with families, yes, both the parents are on the same page. The problem is when they are on this, the idea that they are on the same page is on keeping their child happy all the time, which means accepting things which may not be acceptable otherwise in beyond their home environment, basically. So, say for example, I see a child using a crayon not just on the wall, but on the bed, on the sofa, on the floor, anywhere the child wants to. And when, as an educator or a consultant, when I'm asking the family to allow the child to set boundary for the child, or maybe just ask them to have one corner where they can paint, why are you judging my child? My child is fine. If he wants to use the entire wall, it's his wish. So somewhere I think the idea of supporting the child has also shifted. Um,
Hmm.
it's
I think
more,
so.
yeah, it's more, and the concept of soft parenting these days. Uh, Parents are very scared of being loud to the child, being strict to the child. Um, I see they are lacking that fine balance of understanding when to draw the boundary and how much freedom to, allow this young child. So, how would you, address this to these parents who are not understanding these kind of, minute things?
That's a really key problem. And I think we're seeing it in the United States, you're seeing it in India. There's a lack of discernment as to what's really good for the child and what's not. And it comes to media, it comes to screen time, it comes to the freedom to do certain things that are really destructive to anybody else. And yeah, this is a tough one. I think I'm just going to go back into my experience when I was running a school. We had 220 children in the school from infants all the way through high school. And at one point, I basically I said, okay, I'm going to offer the training program to every parent. I'd like you to come to at least some of the sessions, and most of them, we'd had uh, 2 sessions a week for a whole school year for 6 months, and then sometimes we did one session a week for a year. But when the parents understood what we were doing in Montessori and why we were doing it, they were much more willing to start complying because they realized, okay, this has got something that we're not seeing at home. And I show lots of slides of their own children working, and they just couldn't imagine it because their child was maybe wild at home or whatever. And so sometimes parent training can be very, very helpful. You can't tell them what they're doing wrong. You just simply tell them what we do in our classroom and let them think about how that might apply. That's one way. Some of you probably, I see some nods, and you probably have got suggestions as well. But um, it's a difficult problem when the culture itself doesn't really understand children, and then we're trying to create this. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if the parents and the teachers can get to a point of agreement, the child is going to thrive much more successfully. And when there's two different environments and they have to adjust, they don't remember. Like I remember I run a school that we had an after school in the same room. Well, during the after school, the rules were completely different than they were during the school year when I was teaching. And so the children became very confused. They didn't know when certain things were allowed and when they were not. And I think that's a kind of an analogy to what happens when the school and the home are completely different. The child doesn't remember where it's okay to do what. And so to have a meeting with the parents is saying the more we can get on the same page, the healthier it will be for your child and for your relationship with your child.
Yeah, many parents, many children don't even go to Montessori schools, and many Montessori schools are just by the name Montessori, but rarely do they practice the principles to the T. And also, thanks to the world of internet, the social media world is coming up with different kinds of shorts. The short is a generalized version of whatever you want to communicate, and not really, may not be suited for you as a family. So you have to be, as you said, discernment is the key. What suits you,
Yeah.
you must, just take it and let go the things that may not work for you as a family. So yeah, I totally agree. Now, the other question, let me see. Yeah. So what signs show us that a child's inner development is being nurtured or not? And how can we respond with care and trust so that it continues growing?
Well, to me, the key to all of this is concentration. When I see a child can get engaged in something and stay with that something for a while, he's found connection to his inner teacher. He's going to be okay. And if the child is flitting around from one thing to another and never settles down, that tells me he's not in touch with his own inner teacher. He hasn't found it yet. And sometimes this is a very American thing, and it may be an Indian thing, but for many families, more is better. The more toys the child has, the better it is. And I certainly found this when I was working in Ukraine. They were so proud of how much stuff they had. And I said, well, why don't you get rid of about 2/3 of it and rotate it into the classroom instead of having 16 puzzles. All you need is one or two. Just rotate them. Don't. And I think what I guess I'm saying is that when there's too much to choose from, children have a hard time choosing. So just limit to their things that that they're going to like, and take everything away. And like at Christmas time for us, Diwali for you, maybe when parents and family give lots and lots of presents for children, it becomes very overwhelming, and they don't know what to work with. And so then they might just go from one thing to another thing to another thing. And so we have to find ways to create what Montessori called peaceful sameness. Try to create a time and a place that it's peaceful, and there's just a few things. And you see them, they like one of the things or the other thing, and then maybe you bring out something else that's similar to that, they'll take them further. Like we used to have children in our school that really liked pouring. But then after a while, they'd get tired with pouring, but they still needed the coordination. So then we'd bring out colored water, and we'd bring out something else, and we'd different kinds of pitchers and different kinds of cups and saucers. And the way we would term it, it's the same but different. It's giving them the same opportunity to develop that coordination, but it's a different looking lesson, and so they'll go for it. And so, sometimes we can use our minds to think about how, when we see a child is struggling with certain thing, he needs to be having lots of activities of this type, then we're going to vary them so that it's always something interesting.
Yeah. As they say, practice makes them perfect. So repetition is the key. And with limited, as they say, less is more, right? So have limited supplies, but let them repeat it as much as they can so that they master the skill. So I have two more questions from my end. However, I will ask you in the end. I will open the space for audiences to ask questions if they have any. I have few questions from audiences during registration as well. So I will ask one question, and by the time, if you have any question, audiences, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself and talk, or else you can type in the chat. Aditi. Yes, Aditi, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. How do you, Maria Montessori has said that to have a peaceful world, your children you have to inculcate peace in your child. But the environment, if it is conflict ridden, how do you inculcate peace in the child?
Well, that's a very important question. And I think, I've been to AMI conferences and I've been to AMS conferences, and their approach to peace is completely different. And the AMS people say, well, I have a little peace table, and that's where the children go and they talk it out. But in the AMI conferences, they say, no, that's a superficial approach. You have to create, in my term, you have to create an ambiance, for the children where there is calm, there is peace. And if a child is really struggling with something, he's angry, he's hitting, whatever, you're going to take him, like one of the things Montessori says is take him by the hand and say, well, just keep your hand. I want to be with you until he gets so sick of you that he's going to behave so he can go away and do his own thing. I mean, that's one thing to do. Sometimes teachers have a chair that children can sit in when they're out of its sorts. And when they get calm, they can come back and join the group. I've had children that I've had to physically restrain, that they were so angry, they were kicking and screaming and so forth. And I would take them into the secretary and I'd say, I'd like to have the child would like to stay with you for a little while until he calms down, and then he can come back in the classroom. Because you kind of sometimes have to realize that a child who's having a complete temper tantrum is interfering with the learning of the other 25 children in the classroom. So, how do you deal with it? And if you have a way to have somebody take him for a walk or do something not just punitive, but just to try to change his scenery until he can calm down, then he can come back.
Yeah, I remember my trainer, Julia Hilson. She used to tell us, whenever you have to communicate with a child, especially if it is a young child, I think even with the older ones, when we want to communicate, that also shows it means business. I think it's better to come to the eye level and then speak to the child.
Absolutely.
When you make an eye contact, that's when the child knows that there is not going to be any negotiations further, and it works the best.
And it's respectful, he'd have to look up to you, but you can get down to his level, and you said you're demonstrating that you're serious about this.
Yeah, and as you said, it is not punitive because you are just communicating and you are expressing rationals about whatever incident happens, right? So that's it.
But how do you establish the Montessori? Like, I'm a Montessori mother, I have a son, and a lot of conflict in the home environment. So he goes to the school and he comes back, and there's a lot of hostility, and home environment is not conducive to peace. So he feels that stress at home. So how do you do that in the home environment? The same thing that you do in the Montessori classroom, how do you bring that into your home if it is an environment of conflict?
Well, I think you have to really take a step back and look, what is the trigger for the hostility? Is it something you're saying, something you're doing, something he's not allowed to do at home? What could you do? And maybe if the child has his own bedroom or a corner of the kitchen where you can say, you're going to be your space. What lessons shall we have here? Would you like to do some spooning? Would you like to do some hammering? What would you like to do? And so we try to create a space for them where they feel they've got the same opportunities to just relax and do the lessons at home as they do at school. And obviously, maybe there are some underlying problems with one or the other parent or with a sibling, maybe the sibling, or like I've seen, you've probably all seen this too, out on the playground sometimes. Some child will be so mean to another child, but never does it in front of the teacher. So you don't really know until one time you happen to be just at the right time to hear. And so you're kind of trying to find out what's the trigger here.
I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You need to build the trust with the child so that the child feels comfortable expressing. Conflicts happen, and I think in many families conflicts happen. But what is important is the child still believes that I am loved, and I think when they feel they are loved, there is less of resistance and less hostility for sure. What would you like to say, Mary Ellen, on that?
I agree with you. I think that, sometimes we have to stop ourselves from reacting. We have to simply try to see what's going on, ask the child, well, what's wrong? Why are you mad? Instead of reacting. So, well, go to your room, or this or that and the other. That many parents are kind of on a trigger, and whenever the child does something that they don't like, they think that they have to do something. Well, sometimes you just have to listen.
Yeah, that's so true. We have Shraddha Kochar. She asks, how do you think Maria Montessori would respond today to screen time um, in recent times? Yeah.
Well, that's a really good question. She does say that every child should learn machines. They should learn whatever machines are active in our culture. So I think that there's a time and a space. Like when I was teaching preschool, we would not allow computers in there. But for elementary, we had a dad who gave us 5 computers, and so the children could use them for research. But I had 10-minute egg timers, and they could only use it for a certain amount of time, and we had all kinds of things blocked so they couldn't go to certain places. But they can be useful. I think when it comes to screen time, it's just, and as far as I'm concerned, it's an addiction. And when they come into the Montessori classroom, things are not moving so quickly. They're boring, and so you have to just say no screen time allowed in the school. And sometimes we get parents in the United States who have TVs in the back of their vans. So kids are watching cartoons all the way as they're driving to school. And then they come to school and there's nothing moving, there's nothing happening. So I just say, well, it's going to take some time to get the children accustomed to what it's like in a Montessori classroom. So as Montessori said, you just keep giving lessons, you give lessons, you give lessons. Maybe they won't want them, but if they've watched them, then when they're ready for them, they know how to do them. So you just have to keep focusing on what Montessori said and what Montessori did. And just, no phones, no screen time in the classroom is allowed. I'm sorry, that's just not going to be happening. And they get used to it, and then they start finding things that are interesting to them. And that's where you've got the entree to concentration. Like I had a little boy. This was a great experience for me. I was my first year teaching, right? And he'd just go around run, 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 making noises like cars all the time and knocking things off shelves and bumping into other children. And I just didn't know what to do because he wouldn't accept any lessons from me. He was just very, very out of control. And I remember going home one night and just crying myself to sleep. And then when I woke up, I called my boyfriend and I said, I need a hubcap. And he said, what? And I said, can you get me a metal hubcap? I took it into school and we have a metal polishing lesson in our classroom. So I did the polishing of the hubcap. Well, oh my gosh, that little boy, his jaw dropped and he did it again. And every day for weeks, he did it. And then begin to realize, oh, maybe there's something else in this room that I might like. But so sometimes you find something that they really like and give them the opportunity to dive deep. And that was the beginning of normalization for him. Madhura, you said something earlier, and I want to go back. I didn't get a chance to say it then. Montessori talks about when children come to us at age 3, they need to be normalized. And I guess my question then, as I've matured in my own thinking and my own parenting, why? Why shouldn't they only are needing to be normalized if the parents didn't know how to get them normal in those first 3 years? And so I think there's a lot of parent education of the necessity of allowing children alone time, quiet time, focus time, and having materials that are just for them. Some homes have nothing for the children to do and others have too much. So you got to find the fine line.
I go back to the story of my daughter when she was young again. Why I go back? Because at that time I was not Montessori trained. And I had put her in a Montessori environment. And I think she was 2 years, 11 months. Her school teacher called me and she asked me, what does she do when she is coming to the school in the morning, first thing? And what does she do soon after she goes back to home after the school? And I said, nothing. She eats, she has her breakfast, and when she comes back, she has her lunch and all that. She said, no. I'm asking something else. Does she watch screen? And yes, Nidhi, we are coming to you. I saw you. So, she said, please don't hesitate. Don't lie. because if you are lying, you are digging a deeper hole for your own child. So, yes, I was reluctant, but I opened up and I said yes. When she is eating in the morning, we have the screen open. And when she is coming back and eating, again, the screen is open. So she said, yes, it is very evident because in the classroom, she feels so entitled. She comes very royally, sits on the teacher's lap, the adult's lap, and she says, I don't want to work today. Or some days she would say, it's my birthday. Why should I work on my birthday? And these kind of scenarios were coming for quite some time, and this is why they approached and spoke to me. I said, what's the solution? They said, you have to stop screen time immediately. And from that day, I stopped the screen completely. For 3 months, she had no screen. And I think children are very intuitive. Even though I never told her what was the meeting about, she somehow sensed it. So she never came and imposed or, compelled me to turn on the TV. But in those 3 months, there was this cycle, lying and getting dust, collecting dust. She learned the cycle on her own in those 3 months. So, as you said, children need more opportunity to, explore their environment, use their body, rather than sitting in front of screen, because screen is everything. All the cartoons these days are so fast moving that it stimulates the brain so much, anything looks very slow for them. And especially in a Montessori environment or even in home environment, everything seems to be very slow. So yeah, as you mentioned rightly, screen is definitely not a good, alternative for children's learning for sure. So coming to Neeti, yes, Neeti, you have a question.
I just want to make one comment on that, and that is get them outside.
Yes.
There's something that one writer in the United States called nature deficit syndrome, when children just they live in apartments, they don't go outside and play at all, and it's just not healthy. Anyway, with the next question.
So thank you so much for this session. It's been very insightful. I wanted to share something that I have noticed and maybe get your viewpoint on that. These young children in the age of maybe 3 to 5, they're getting better at communication, etc. And they go home and tell their parents or families things that happen in the school, etc. But sometimes it might be their perspective. It may not be the absolute truth, and then parents, they try to dig in deeper. They would ask questions. They would give them some words which may not be relevant at all. And, then it kind of frames a story which seems, absurd or, strange. And then parents believe that, etc. Those sort of things happen. And I wonder how to help the parents understand how to do listen to the children, but not to also believe everything that they say word by word. I don't know if you've experienced something like this with young children.
Reminding me with my oldest child, my son, I'd ask him, "Oh, what did you do today?" Nothing. And that was his consistent story. And I realized that he didn't know the names of all the lessons that he did. And sometimes I wouldn't even know what he was talking about. So it was easier for him to just say nothing. And, and then I started asking more pointed questions. Well, did you wash the table today? Did you do a cylinder block today? Did you, and I give him oh, yeah. And then he'd agree, but he didn't always have the vocabulary and the sense that I would understand. So I think that might be part of the more the parents, like one of the things that I would do is I'd have like 4 evenings of parent things. One evening I just show slides of all the practical life lessons. And then another evening I'd show all the sensorial lessons, and then language. And by doing that, it gave the parents more of an understanding. Oh, when he's talking about doing the pink tower, I didn't know what he was talking about. Well, now you know. So that might be helpful.
Yes, yes. There is another thing that my daughter's school had suggested. I would just like to share here because I think as parents, every parent does that. So I was also trying, and the same answer was coming, nothing. So she said, when you come back from office and somebody is asking about how was office, do you feel like sharing it? You don't, right?
You want to move on in your day.
It's the same
Good
with the
point.
child. The child is not interested. If you want your child to open up about how was their, how did their day go, you have to share about what you did in their absence. And when you do that, the child automatically feels, oh, I think it's my responsibility also to share what I do, and eventually it turns out, very, very effective. And it actually did. So maybe try that as well.
Thank you to the both of you. Thank you.
Shraddha, you have a few more questions, right? Would you like to unmute yourself and share?
Hi, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So this was a question. So I work with toddlers from 0 to 3 at the moment. And this was a query that I see a lot that's happening with the children who are transitioning from the toddler environment to the primary environment. So this child is transitioning anywhere between 2.5 to 3 years old, right? Approximately. Um, Very often, what I'm seeing now is that the child who was absolutely normalized to a very large extent suddenly starts showing a lot of deviations once they enter primary. So, a class size of 12 to 14 children, and then suddenly you have 25, maybe more in one place. And what would be, I mean, of course, they are craving attention. Of course, they are unable to regulate themselves emotionally. We understand that. And it takes a while. It takes a while. But at the same time, the adult is working with giving presentations to the older children, helping these new children to settle down. What would be the best way and what would be the kind of timeline uh, before making it a bigger deal than it is? You know what I mean? Like, of course, hitting is not normal, but of course, we also see that very commonly in a child at 2.5, 3.5, till they are a little older, around 4. From what I have noticed in the last 9 years, is that around 4, they are able to deal with their emotions a lot better. But how do you help the child when they are in that 2.5 to 4, where they are still exhibiting hitting, pinching, pushing, craving attention in some way, while keeping the entire classroom still calm, and that child tends to get labeled. That child, the older children are going back home and saying things like, so and so pinched me and so, and the same thing. And then it becomes a chatter, especially in the Indian system. The mothers keep chatting about it and they start labeling the child. And I think it's really unfair. So I just want to know how best we could help the child from that 2.5 to 4 when they are actually in a better space.
I've worked with a lot of children during that transition period, and I working with the teachers, and sometimes the parent wants to move the child up, or the ratio would be better if they move up, but they're really not emotionally ready to move up. So I think that, sometimes 2.5s are ready, but sometimes they're not. And so if you just wait a few months and maybe have them go periodically and have a visit and then spend, an hour in that classroom and then come back, so they kind of get to know what's going to be the expectation in that room that's different from in this room. I would just say to slow the process down. But believe me, I've had parents who just, well, he's 2.5, he needs to go, or he's this and that many, he's going to be 3 in next month. I don't want him in toddlers anymore. Well, that's where he really is flourishing. Let's let that move be according to his needs rather than our needs. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, it is. It is because, yes, there are children who have transitioned earlier because parents feel like if the child hasn't transitioned at 2.5,
something is wrong with my child. Like that child moved at 2.6. Why is my child not moved at 2.8? They could have had absenteeism, they could have had health issues, they could have had a vacation, a change in a maid, a change in helpers. But I think that's a good point for me to bring up maybe at the next open house. So thank you, Mary.
Well, the other thing is that boys tend not to mature as fast as girls.
Right.
And so sometimes the boys need to just stay longer. And sometimes they're just emotionally so all over the place that they're not ready to go into a bigger class. So, it all has to get focused on where the child's going to be the best success.
Yes. That's
okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Question.
So, Shraddha, I worked in toddlers community, and what we used to tell the parents is, see, some children enter the environment at 15 months, some at 18 months, some even at 20 months, right? And you just cannot say, because my child is 2.6 now, has to move to 3 to 6 environment. So what we used to communicate to the parents is that, see, these are the materials in the environment. Once the child has touched and mastered all the material in the environment and is now ready to help the younger ones or the new ones coming in the environment, that is when the child is ready to transition and we will support. Rather than saying 2.6 or 2.8 is the time, don't give the timeline, but tell them this is the time when your child is ready, when he has touched everything, and work with it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Marjorie.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, it's end of time. So I'll come back to the question that I wanted to ask. So, Mary Ellen, you have authored powerful books, right? 2 books. And what encouraged you to write, and what would you say to other Montessorians who want to share their voice as well?
When I write, I just get inspired and it pours out of me. And my next book is going to be out in about a month. It's going to be called Free to Be, The Essence of Montessori. And I didn't hear that. It will be on Amazon, so it'll be electronically available. And I think the message that I would have is what I like to call the education of the heart, the head, and the hand. In the Absorbent Mind, Montessori talks about the great civilizations of Egypt as an example. And she said on the headstones, you see beautiful artwork, of course, all through Egypt, but you also see on the headstones a respect and a calling out of qualities of character. And of course, and the ability of the hand to do things what made them famous and great in civilizations. And so I think people think education is physical, get ready to be on the teams when you get in high school, and it's mental. But to me, the most important part is the education of the heart. And if you combine that with the head and the hand, you're gonna be in a much better situation. But the love that we have for children, they feel that and they feel safe. And unless they feel safe, they can't function to begin with. And just the teaching children that the love that they give to each other is as important as the lesson that they do well. We're too mental in a lot of Montessori, and we have to just get locus back into the heart. And if you do that and you come from the heart, you're more likely to make the right decisions as to what lessons the children are ready for and how to talk to the parents. So thank you so much for having me on, Madhuri. This has been such a pleasure to meet all of you. I want to come to India even more now and meet all of you and go to the Montessori schools that are there.
Please do. And whenever you plan to, let me know. I'm okay. So honored. I'm so happy that you agreed to come and speak on my platform, and I'm sure all our audiences would have definitely great takeaways from today's session. You have a great weekend, Mary Ellen, and I wish you all a wonderful time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night. Good night and
you.
good evening. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.